All right, welcome. My name is Kyle Magatelli. I am the webinar and social media coordinator for the Student Doctor Network. And we're joined today by Dr. Trevor Cabrera, and Dr. Rip Patel will hopefully be here any moment now to talk about being a locums physician. So Dr. Cabrera, thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So real quick, while we let Dr. Patel get on, I'm going to run through a little bit about Student Doctors resources. So the Student Doctor Network is a 501c3 nonprofit established in 1999, and SDN's mission is to make sure that pre-health and health students have resources available to them that are free, that can help them succeed in becoming a health professional. Hop onto studentdoctor.net and poke around. I can talk until I'm blue in the face, but the best thing you can do is go on there and explore for yourself. So if you're a pre-med, we have the pre-med planner app. This is really useful in terms of one thing that's great, tracking your hours. The absolute last thing you need to do when you're going through your clinicals and shadowing as a pre-med is not actually be up to date on what you've got. So this app is very useful for that. It helps you stay on track with your timeline. So you can find that on the Apple app or Google Play Store. Student Doctor Network communities, we have forums for every health profession that there is. Anything you are interested in, hop on the forums and you will find other pre-health students and as well as providers that are practicing. Get your questions answered, find out what you need to know to hit your goals. And physician and resident communities. If you are an attending, hop on to our physician and resident communities. There are forums for interns, residents, fellows, and attendings from all specialties and subspecialties. You can gain access to a very diverse network of providers the world over for networking, expand your knowledge, just a lot of knowledge on there. And finally, catch us on social media. We're on all the usual suspects. Find out more about what we're up to, webinars like these, and resources. And I think that's about all I ever need to say. All right, so Dr. Cabrera, if you could, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So I am born and raised in California. I went to undergrad in San Diego. Ended up going to medical school in New Orleans, Louisiana at Tulane University. And then for my pediatric residency training, I was in Houston at UT Houston, or Children's Memorial Hermann Hospital. I think down the street actually from Dr. Patel, who I believe is also kind of at one of the sistering neighboring hospitals. So I finished in 2020, and in 2020, when I finished, I kind of wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I had been told during residency about this whole concept of something called locum tenens, and decided to do that and jumped straight in. I've been doing that ever since, and only that.
Cool. So, all right, to expand on that a little bit, is there anything, how did you get into locums versus traditional practice?
Right. So I think the big thing that happened was I did have a locum agency that came and talked to my program when I was in training. Like I said, not a lot of people have heard of doing locum tenens, and it's one of those things that I feel is becoming more popular, but still is underutilized and not very well known kind of way of practicing. Depending on what kind of what specialty someone does, you'll see it also more or less in some fields versus others. In pediatrics, I probably know at this point 400 or 500 pediatricians. I mean, tons. And I've only met a handful, maybe half a dozen or maybe a dozen or so that have ever considered doing locum tenens. I didn't want to go into private practice, and I didn't want to do academic, take an academic role. And at that time, I wasn't planning for fellowship. And so that kind of is why I steered away from traditional practice. Just being able to have a different kind of flexibility, and there's a lot of pros and cons that have kind of gone that direction now.
Cool. So what do you like and dislike about being a locums provider?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the biggest or the coolest things about doing locum tenens is I basically do whatever I want. I mean, there's so many pros and so many positives. I could go on forever, but the big things are the salary is in general, at least for what I negotiate, between 30 and 50% higher than my friends and my colleagues. Some of my jobs are even higher than that. But I also get to go wherever I want in the country. I get to take off whatever days I want and work as much as I want to work on the opposite side of it. And the other thing is a lot of my expenses are paid for. So it's
Oh,
it gives me an opportunity to really just really hit those student loans really hard. Um, on the con side, one thing that I always let people know is it's a little unstable to work just purely off of locum tenens. There's an ample work out there, and for some specialties over others, it's nonstop. Pediatrics can sometimes be a little bit harder than internal medicine or emergency medicine. And the more specialized you are, the less likely that a locum might be needed, just given specialized things are in bigger centers where they usually have enough help. But besides the instability, I also am a 1099 independent contractor, so I have to take into consideration all my own benefits. Those are two things that I think are really not huge issues, but they are things I have to consider.
yeah, I've had to do a 1099 before. It's not a good time come tax season.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that I just you have to make some smart choices, and I feel that in order to be successful working professionally as locum tenens, doing this as a mainstay of income and of subsistence, is you have to kind of make some kind of smarter strategic business choices, which is what I kind of try to focus on.
Cool. And we got a question from Laura Turner. What's been the most interesting location you've worked in?
Um, I would say I got an opportunity to, I spent 6 months in 2021 working 45 minutes from the uh, U.S. Mexico border in a little town called Deming, New Mexico. And then that was kind of interesting. We'd have moms that would cross the border and come to see us to deliver their babies. And then the other big one was Bismarck, North Dakota. So on the polar opposite, not no pun intended, I was there the last week of December, and it was negative 27 degrees, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. So I thought that was an interesting time. But majority of my work that I've done has been in Maine, specifically Central Maine, and that's been probably my favorite location.
Cool. Yeah, anything sub-zero is a horrible time. I hope to never do it again myself.
Yeah, I wasn't really trying to go back there.
So, what types of specialties can go into locums? I know you said the more specialized you are, there might be less need for it.
Right. So from what I've seen, and at this point, it's been kind of nice. I've spoken to a lot of different locum tenens agencies. I've spoken to a lot of different individual practitioners. The ones that I've met just in my walk of life, and that's based on where I physically am working in the hospital. I've met anesthesiologists, ER physicians, internal medicine, OBGYNs. I actually had met a neurologist too, and that one was a pediatric neurologist, which was interesting. But really, all specialties can go into locums. I mean, I feel some of the rarer ones that are hard to find in general, like radiation oncology, those will probably not go into locums. And the reason which you have to think about is really economics and just access to healthcare. These jobs that I'm usually taking are in places where they can't really find reliable help, and they're in places that are needing a little bit more backup. So for people that are super specialized, if you're doing something that is only done in big cities, most of the time it's all going to be focused there. Versus you're most likely not going to be practicing that 45 minutes from the border. You're going to be in a bigger city. But really, everybody can go into it. And the other thing is, even advanced practice providers. I know some nurse practitioners and physician assistants that also do locums as well.
Okay, cool. That's a good lead in for the next question. For persons in other professions, is there a need for locums dentists, physical therapists, or other healthcare roles?
And that's actually a good question. That's a question that I haven't really asked about that. I don't know the roles for locums dentists or things such as physical therapists. I will say that there are travel positions, and the interesting thing is a lot of hospitals that need locum tenens oftentimes they travel other traveling healthcare providers. So I often cross paths with traveling nurse assistants, obviously traveling nurses, but then I've seen traveling respiratory therapists. Dentists, I'm not sure, but I do. From what I've loosely heard, I believe there's a need on the Indian health reservations and more of the rural populations, but it's less of a disparity as a general thing than a lot of medical professions, and I think that has to do partially with how there's reimbursements and insurance. But I'm not 100% sure on that one. I'd have to ask an agency myself.
Okay. It sounds like a reasonable thing to say. Just ask the agency.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. Okay. So something I know I'm wondering because so I'm applying to med school next summer, and I hate staying in one place too long. So locum sounds absolutely awesome to me. Something I was wondering is what is the process like from accepting a role to starting work? How much time do you have to get there? How are travel, housing, and per diem handled?
That's a really good question. So normally what will happen, and there's a variety of ways to go through this, but especially for anyone that's doing their first job, is um, I have contacted agencies over the last couple of years and like really let them know that I wanted to work with them, and then I will usually go through some internal credentialing process for that agency, where I kind of send my demographic history, my if I've ever had any malpractice issues, general application stuff to just work as an affiliate, as a contractor with the agency. The agency will then call me and say, "Hey, there's a job that we're interested in Wisconsin. This is the details. Are you interested in the job?" And we'll talk about it, and we'll see, figure out a little bit more details on what the job duties are, what the compensation is going to be like, etc., the schedule. And then sometimes if depending on the facility, they'll just accept me and they'll confirm that I'm going there. Or other times it'll move to needing an interview with somebody on site. And most of the time, I do get to talk to or interview with somebody there. But if it's a small hospital and there's not a heavy situation, and depending on how desperate they might be for help, if it's an emergency, I may not have that interview stuff. And so, that's kind of how we kind of make that process. And then once the contract is decided on, and the dates are secured, I make plans to go out to that facility. And within 30 days, these contracts can sometimes change or be canceled. And so that's where some of that instability is. But once we get into that window, usually the agency will help with organizing travel, organizing lodging, and everything else, which is really a rental, and kind of the logistics on that end. So I guess kind of answer that part to your last question there, how that's all handled. Sometimes it's directly billed from the facility or the client, which would be the hospital. And then a lot of other times I'm able to make those reservations on my own and I'll pay for them. And then I'll send all my receipts to get reimbursed. So I try to get to each site, these days, 2 days before the assignment. Right now I'm in California, and I work, for example, on Friday night. So I try to get here Wednesday night. And the main reason for that is not to have any travel issues. But I think as far as how much time you have to get there, it's kind of up to whatever your schedule will fit. And that's the nice thing is some agencies will cover some certain things that certain ones won't. Really, as far as a per diem kind of thing goes, there's not food or anything like that included. But really, that means that's my only expense is food.
Yeah, that's not bad. So you said the magic word that I was looking for, which is reimbursement. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I've seen that handled different ways. Some clients I've learned will negotiate certain contracts with hospitals or with car agencies, and the way that it has to be paid is directly from the hospital or from the locum agency. And obviously, it's fine because I don't have to pay for it. But if anyone's doing the point game, I love putting on my own credit card and getting reimbursed because then I get all the points. So I try to do that as much as I can. I can't always do it, but it is the sweet spot.
Cool. So next question, what do you look for in a reliable agency? That's from Emil Chuck.
That is a super, super good question. So, as part of a shameless plug, and I hope you just publish this out there, I have a blog that I started a couple years ago. It's called the nomadicpediatrician.com. And on my blog, I actually put a couple of posts earlier on, and there's some links if you're accessing from a laptop or computer that's easier to see that are kind of on my personal advice on getting started with locums. And it's kind of an unbiased thought, but at this point, I will say I have talked to at least a dozen agencies over the last couple years. I've talked to over a couple dozen recruiters, and it can be a little bit dicey when you're talking to agencies and trying to figure out which one is going to be not going to screw me over, which one has reliable malpractice. At a certain point, you learn that a lot of these contracts with the agency seem to be kind of an industry standard. But when you're kind of starting out, what I usually would recommend to any of my friends to stay unbiased and not drop any specific locum tenens agency names, but there is a group called NALTO, NALTO. It's the National Association for Locum Tenens organization, and this is kind of a moral, kind of ethical group accreditation. I don't know how to say it other than um, the locum tenens agencies that are part of it abide by certain kind of codes of ethics. So within anybody that's a NALTO member, you can generally trust them because they all will have a standard contract that will usually say the same things. And the main things that I'm looking for, right, are contracts that say I'm an independent contractor, that they don't control me, and that their malpractice is standard, is what is considered normal for the industry and has tail coverage for the future. Those are the big things. And then within that, once you talk to an agency, there's going to be good and bad recruiters, and that's why you talk to so many, and they know that. I've talked to some that are great, but the agency was not great, and vice versa. And so, what you look for, in my opinion, is communication. But everybody has their own preference on how much that matters. If the money outweighs that, then maybe that's something that's okay with you. But I like the fact that I can get a hold of my recruiter if there's an emergency. And so most of the time, I personally haven't had a bad situation where I've shown up at a bad work site and needed to be pulled out. Um, I've heard rumors of those things, but if you're using a locum tenens agency that's part of Dalto, they generally will be fairly reliable.
All right, cool. Yeah, your blog was anybody that registered for this, they saw the link to your blog and just put it in the chat there.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, so this is a good one from Frankie All01. Do you need to get licensed in all different states? In case you do, how do you do it? Yeah, how does the licensing work?
Yeah, so that's another one that it's funny. I was working on a blog post for that the other day, which I also sent off to a blog to write for locumstory.com and also Comp Health, which is an agency, but I write as an independent entity. But this is a really interesting, kind of hard question. So to give you kind of a big picture, because people ask me this all the time, for nurses, there exists a compact license. And so that's why travel nursing is such a big deal. It's really easy for a lot of nurses to go from one state to the next because of this compact license. But for physicians mainly, and I'm not sure how it goes for APPs, but for physicians, you do need to get a license in every state you practice, and it sucks.
Okay.
And so the one thing I'd say is for anybody that's coming out of training or anybody that doesn't have a large history, you've only had one or two jobs in your lifetime, get as many licenses as you can afford or get the licenses as soon as you can. Because what happens is, and I actually just dealt with this. I actually just got my license for North Carolina and as well as Massachusetts in the last couple of weeks. And I will say that the more of a history you have, the harder it becomes and the more steps that are required to get a medical license. And so every license is different as far as the cost. Every license is different as far as what they will require to issue it to you. So, for example, Pennsylvania, I know, required me to do some extra continuing medical education or CME specifically on child abuse. And Missouri was a paper chart that required me to have a transcript from my medical school training, and also needed to have some verification from undergrad, which was a decade ago. And so it depends on each state will have different things they look for, and a majority of them will use the FCVS. which is I'm blanking on what the actual acronym stands for, but it is the let's see, the Federation Credentials Verification Service. It's part of a way that you can kind of get all of your history for your step scores and everything centralized. So that's kind of a basic thing, but then kind of the next level, which is if you're really going to commit to doing really true locum tenens work, what I recommend for everybody, and many recruiters would recommend this as well, but this would be getting something called the IMLC. And if you just Google IMLC, it'll come up. It's the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. And what this does is, I haven't looked at it in a couple years, but a couple of years ago, there was only 28 or 29 states that were part of it. Every year, new states are added on. What it does is it allows some sort of fast track to obtaining a license. Now, excuse me, from my understanding, it doesn't get rid of the cost and it doesn't get rid of all of the paperwork, but it does speed it up. And so the advantage with doing that is if you're in a pinch and a job pops open that's in a different state you don't have a license for, the IMLC can help to expedite that. So for example, today's Thursday, September 8th, right? Let's say that there's a job that comes up in 2 weeks from now that needs me to credential and is willing to pay me a lot to go out there because it's only in 2 weeks. Well, depending on what state it is, there's no way I'll get licensed in 2 weeks if I have to go through the medical board the normal direction. But if I have the IMLC, a lot of times you can expedite that and shrink that time down and get the license faster. So it becomes a pain, and that's why I just encourage everyone to stay incredibly organized. Once you get the licenses, and if you have the money to do it, my recommendation would be to keep it up because it is a lot harder to reactivate it sometimes, or it's just a pain. I had a North Carolina license 2 years ago. We reactivated it this past month to do a job, and the steps that it took, it wasn't worth it in my opinion. It would have been better just to keep it active. So I guess a long answer to that, but it is something that if you can do it earlier when you have less of a history and you have a smaller CV, that's when you should do it.
Okay, cool. And we got links for FCVS and IMLCC in our chat. And Dr. Patel, glad you
Hey
could join
guys.
us.
Hey, how's
Yeah,
it going?
sorry, I think I got the wrong something about miscommunication about time. I'm actually in an Uber right now, so I just got the text. So pardon any technical issues.
You're here now. Very glad that you can join us. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Patel, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I'm coming from the medical school, so if I get cut off or whatever, just bear with me. Yeah, I've been doing locums work for about 9-10 years now. I started with a hospital here kind of as a 1099 with a staffing company. Didn't really like it and started doing a little bit of traveling with agencies and then started my own group. And we directly contract with hospitals in rural localities around the country. And we provide them with coverage with board-trained, board-certified ER docs. I really enjoyed it a lot. I also do part-time academics. I'm coming back from the medical school right now with my medical students. And it's been great. I don't think I could go back.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to just, you got a little bit into this, but I did want to ask, what do you like and dislike about being a locums provider?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I really enjoy the freedom. I just like making my own schedule. I like getting paid on an hourly rate. I don't like the RVU compensation models, which with an emergency, it gets very difficult because you're basically paid on productivity, which can often lead you to practice some unsafe methodologies. I mentioned making my schedule. Some people stick to more days and nights. I like traveling. I like being able to take time off. And I really just like the variety of things that I see. But I really like the relationship where I'm just a 1099 with all these hospitals we cover. And if there's ever any issue, then I'm not obligated to go back. Unfortunately, medicine is medicine, but I think in 2022, we have to be a little practical about healthcare settings. And in emergency, the staffing of a lot of places is just always under flux. So you don't know one day who's going to be staffing the ER. It might be one company, another company. And so I think that just protects you a lot if you find the work conditions aren't good, administration is not on your side, especially if you're in a high risk specialty. Just briefly, the dislikes. The travel does get on you a little bit. However, I feel like if you can keep a consistent schedule, you can sort of avoid doing days, nights, night, days. So I always tell people you lose time either with changing on your sleep cycles or traveling. And I'd rather just lose time traveling. Sometimes you can walk into ERs that may not be the best, but there are always ways to avoid that. Just feeling the ER out before you go. But I mean, really, for every dislike I could think, there's a way to get around it. So I don't really have that many. The last thing I'll say is sometimes your work may not be regular and you may have gaps in your schedule. But if you have a lot of hospitals you serve, usually that's not an issue.
Okay, cool. So I heard hourly pay. That sounds pretty enticing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. The other, like, I think a lot of specialties do different ways of compensating. In emergency, the spectrum of how you're compensated is really all over the place. Some places do no hourly and you're paid purely on productivity. Some places do all hourly. Some do like a low base with the high productivity you're supposed to make. And I just don't like any of that. I want to go in and just know for budgeting how much I'm going to get compensated for. And I think when you start getting into RVU practice models, there are some benefits to it, but it can also lead to you seeing APP, advanced practitioners, patients, and you may not fully examine them. You may have time to do it, but you get more RVUs if you see more of their people. So I just, that's not a model I like. And I think it can just lead to liability.
Yeah, I spent a little time scribing in an ED, and the charting training was entirely geared towards productivity.
Billing.
Which
Exactly.
yeah, no comment beyond that.
Yeah, exactly. And you get charts thrown back at you a lot on patients that you want to chart this? Do you want to chart that? And like I said, when you have a little bit of disconnection and kind of like a stock portfolio when you're diversified, if that comes an ethical issue for you, which for me it would, you don't have to go back. And it's a pretty simple relationship.
Cool. So, Dr. Patel, what has been the most interesting location you've worked in?
You know, when I started, I really had no clue the capabilities of what you could do with locums work. I was so naive about how all of it operated. So when you start getting into it more, you can get a great idea. You could do it for money. You could do it for freedom. You could do it to become a better physician in whatever specialty you're in. You could do it because you do other stuff. I have friends that do real estate, and they also are physicians as well. You could also do it for fun, and you could go to states where the pay may not be as high, but there's going to be things there that you enjoy, like Vermont, New Mexico have great hiking, outdoor stuff, kayaking. So whatever you like to do, you could probably find a gig somewhere around the country. One of my old residents, she's going to leave her job, get in an RV, and her and her partner are just going to RV across the country and do kind of locums gigs along the way. And I think that's really cool and sounds really exciting. And yeah, so there's just so many options to it. But I'd have to put Vermont up there, working in the mountains of Vermont, getting into hiking, going skiing. It was really, really enjoyable.
Cool.
That's awesome. So
this question for you gentlemen, are most of your placements in rural areas?
I think I think something really interesting, because another question that in between the times Dr. Patel that they were asking was about different specialties doing locums, and he makes some really good points as far as the pay structure and everything, which I think is a whole other component people should think about. But I feel for this question in particular, for myself, I'm a pediatric hospitalist mainly. Sometimes I did do some outpatient work at first, but I will say for pediatrics in particular as a specialty, a lot of the places that we go that I've been sent are rural areas. And when I say rural, I'm talking populations of 25 to 25,000 people. And that's because it's a critical access hospital that doesn't have someone. But there have been a couple of places in bigger cities. I did have a chance to work at a giant children's hospital in St. Louis, Missouri. One in Northern California, and then another one in Maine. So I think it kind of depends. You'd be surprised places that are looking. There's this little hospital that anybody in the pediatric world might know, and probably in the adult world, but it's called CHOP. and Children's Hospital
Yeah.
of Pennsylvania
Yeah.
is. I mean, yeah. So that hospital was looking for a locum tenens for a while, and I mean that was something that I had heard from multiple agencies. So it's not like a secret that I'm throwing out there, but that's one of those interesting places where when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's not a rural area, and that's a really cool place. So I think there's some variety for me, but I don't know about the emergency side. You probably get jobs everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. One of our facilities in Houston, the medical center, was offering locums, and I was trying to figure out why. And part of the reason why was because it's just not a good place to work, meaning for things like metrics, patient safety. And so they're just having a hard time getting people there. And so sometimes there's a reason why. I tell people often it's just because it is rural. Um, but yeah, I think for emergency, a vast majority are. I think if you're in rural, it usually compensates better. But there are options in bigger cities. I've worked in Albuquerque, Santa Fe. I've worked around St. Louis. And so, yeah, I think both options are there, but I think the need is generally higher in rural. And I just add on to that, for things like job security, I know for emergency, COVID really showed us that our jobs were secure, but they weren't as secure as I thought they would be. Because when ER volumes went down, hospitals cut back staffing, and a lot of physicians got furloughed, and their benefits were cut. And it really was eye-opening to me that it's good to have just other options just in case things like this happen. And rural areas are just always in need. And I feel like as the country is gravitating towards big cities, and as some markets may get saturated, I have friends who want to work in Austin. I feel like you have to pay them to work in Austin. I mean, it's just so saturated right now. But I think it's good. And I think the patients are just so kind and they're grateful that you're coming out there to help them.
Oh man, I hear you on that one. I was in Santa Fe also, so was funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Which, by the way, I'd add on to one of my other favorite places to work. What an absolutely incredible city, which I probably never would have discovered if I hadn't started doing locums work.
Yep. Second
Yeah,
that one.
New Mexico is awesome. I got sent out there for a training for deployment when I was in the service, and I want to go back.
Yeah. Hey guys, give me 1 second. I'm just about to get out of my Uber. Sorry, hold on 1 second.
No problem.
I will second. I'll just say, while we're waiting for him to get out, like the nice thing about locums is it has shown a lot of places that I would have never gone. So like I wouldn't have gone to the state of Maine, and I'm so glad that I have had a chance to check it out.
Cool. So Dr. Patel talked about this a little bit, but Dr. Cabrera, how did COVID-19 affect you? That's a question from Emil Chuck.
So COVID-19 was pretty devastating for the field of pediatrics in 2020 because, contrary to some belief out there, when COVID happened, a lot of people decided to keep their kids at home for whatever reason. Schools shut down; they kept them at home. There was masking. And when the kids were staying at home, they actually didn't get as sick. Surprisingly, right? And so when that happened, the volume for us dropped drastically. And I think that's what Dr. Patel would have a comment on the ER census. But when our volume dropped, I actually heard stories of pediatricians that went out of business entirely, private practices, because kids would stay home. They didn't go to the regular checkups, and it was a big problem for them. For me, I had a very hard time finding work in 2020. As a locum tenens, there was not a ton of pediatric work, and it was one of those supply demand issues where there was a huge supply of people that I was competing with for only a couple of jobs. And then that's changed. We're back to normal now, but it was kind of hard in that situation. And if the census goes down and there's not as much of a need, it becomes harder to justify paying for locums or anything to come to those hospitals. So I think that's how it affected me personally. Now I didn't have any intention of taking a permanent job, which was a good thing because I think that would have made a big difference there as well.
Okay, cool. Dr. Patel, anything to add on regarding challenges of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think what had been mentioned, I completely agree with that. It was unfortunate. I think it opened up people's eyes, as I mentioned, and I don't think locums is the answer for everybody, but I think it's something just to think about because if I hadn't had so many places to work, the places that we did get furloughed from. Now we have a clause in our contract; you can't just cut our shifts People have kids, they got to pay mortgages, you got bills to pay, but what your next option is, what are you going to do? Sue the hospital? That's probably not going to go over well either. So you should. You can't just cut somebody's shift. How are they going to fill that week of work out? But then you lose a client that you've been working with for a couple of years. So it creates a really messy, strange situation. I think there's a lot of compassion fatigue, and I think I've seen it a lot. And another thing to factor in with your job is part of healthcare, which is Press Ganey scores. And in the ER, it is really hard to make everybody satisfied because, unfortunately, a lot of patients don't really like us too much. So I think there's a lot of compassion fatigue now. And if you get a lot of patients that maybe are coming in for a COVID test that could probably just get one at Walgreens, and you're more honest with them now, that can affect your scores, that can affect your employment. And so I think with that said, a lot of our colleagues quit, a lot of cut back, a lot of doing other things, a lot of asking, is it worth putting my life at risk when the country is questioning the most basic of fundamental science? So yeah, it was very, very tough, but I think we've hopefully come out stronger from the ones that are still around, and hopefully more colleagues will come back.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that answer. So here's a good one. Could any pre-med shadow you? That's a question from Emil Chuck. I was kind of wondering that one.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know at our hospitals, you have to go through the credentialing to get like your ID, get your TB, all that stuff checked. But I think if it runs through administration, I don't see why not. I'm at the medical school here in Houston at the Baylor College of Medicine. So I think they have a separate system to do that. But I think it's a great idea, by the way, and not running through my miserable life story of how I finally found what I wanted to do. But I spent my time in another residency first, and boy, was that a mistake.
Oh.
Boy, what a life-altering decision that was.
Would you do surgery?
Switch to, yeah. Oh yeah. And I can't tell you how many people told me like, "Hey, go shadow people," and I'm like, I don't have time. I just think I want to be a surgeon, and surgery is a great specialty. Don't get me wrong, but it's just like emergency. It's not for everybody. And so shadowing. By the way, my other option is that we're looking into is emergency or pediatrics, and I really loved them both. But if I had just looked into more of what I wanted to do, it probably would have helped me. Just briefly, when you're in medical school, there ain't much time to figure out what you want to do. You think there is, but there really isn't.
Yeah, but I don't know how big of a benefit there would be to shadowing, in particular, a locum tenens provider.
Right.
I mean, I would be up for it too if the hospital I'm working at that week allows it, which I'm sure they'd be okay with it. But I think it would just be one of those things of like making sure that people don't violate privacy and HIPAA, right? But I think other than that, I mean, yeah, just shadowing in general, definitely agree with that. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I think more of the benefit comes in medical school shadowing as well. But
That's
but yeah, definitely nothing wrong with it. So
Cool. All right, so here's a good one. How do you manage family challenges?
I'm not married. I don't have any kids, so I guess it's. So I did find out, not to get morbid, but when I had COVID, I had death COVID round 1, and I live alone, and so when I was like in bed, unable to get out of bed, I was like, I couldn't even pick up my phone. I was like, I wonder who's gonna find me if nobody checks up on me. But my mom and dad are here, and I'd say one good thing about locums is I really prioritize my loved ones, family, parents, and my personal life first, and then I work my locum schedule around that. And I think as my parents are getting older, I'm in my 40s now. I think that's very important. And I think if you're not happy in your personal life, it's going to be pretty tough to be happy in your career.
Yeah, that's a very mature with experienced thought on it. I would say, because I'm in the same situation. So I'm in the same situation, and I think though the first thing I'd say on that is if you're traveling as much as I'm doing this full time. I don't have a home actually. So I traveled 320 days last year, and I've gone over 250 or something this year already. So I'm actually right now visiting my parents in Sacramento. But I would say that to kind of address that, more speaking to about people that I've met that are do mainly locums that have families. The nice thing about it, like I know an OB that she's actually gonna retire from her private practice and do more locums, and I know another pediatric oncologist that decided to stop practicing oncology and do general pediatrics. They now will actually schedule their family as a priority, like Dr. Patel said, which is really convenient for them because now with their kids being older and in like college or whatnot, they can schedule the holidays or specific dates to go and see them. But I think that's it hasn't happened to like have an emergency. I think for me, knock on wood, yet. So I think though, at the very least, outside of the fact that I do work with agencies, a lot of the directors and the people that I work with actually at the hospital seem to be fairly understanding. But I've just gotten lucky with my placements that I like all the places and the people I work with. But I don't. I think that that's just one of those things that you can be flexible with your schedule to manage that, like we've said. So which is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think, just adding on to that, and I completely agree, you get to dictate your schedule. And so one of the guys that works with me, I mean, he takes summers off for the kids. And then basically him and his wife have Google calendars. And I looked at it, it gives me a seizure looking at it, but they coordinate everything around soccer games and plays and, parent student conferences and whatever. And then he'll then book his locums work around that. So there are definitely ways to do it. And I think he appreciates the time off, being off. He does mainly nights instead of days and gets paid more for it. So yeah, and it really comes down to when you do locums, generally you're going to get compensated more. And so usually possibly you can work less, which means you can be at home more often. So I have a lot of my colleagues that do it that have kids. So it's definitely not something that would prevent you from traveling. By the way, my schedule briefly is my first week of the month, I'm doing medical school stuff, which is why I'm here now. And then usually the next week I'll travel somewhere a little bit farther. And then the next week I'll travel, but it's like driving. So I call that regional locums. So you could do locums nearby. And then the next week I'll travel and then I'll be home and I'll be home for the next 12 days. So the key to all of it to me is I really minimize travel. So I try to do direct flights, hopefully no more than an hour from the airport. But things I can just do to minimize the actual travel burden. Going to Vermont, by the way, was very difficult. 2 connections, takes all day, and usually hospitals don't compensate you for that travel time. Or they don't for me, at least. So,
Are all of your contracts? You said you have your own group. Is that so? Are you part of a group that you own, or you do direct contracts, or do you work with agencies still at all?
right. So what we do is we basically contract directly with the hospitals as 1099s.
Like your group does.
Correct. Yeah. I
That's
started
cool.
with agencies, and I always say agencies are great because they sort of are like, it's like a full service shop. They do the travel. They have a good kind of ear on the ground about what's going on in the market. And they negotiate with the hospital, so you really don't have to. But I think as I kept moving forward, we sort of do like a 80-20 mix now, where 80% we direct contract. And then we still use a few agencies because, like I said, they always are aware of kind of what's going on. And I think most people do agencies. I think agencies are great if you have good agents that have good experience, that know you well.
Yeah, and just to answer kind of probably the question of anybody that's listening to this, I mean, so we talked about earlier what's reimbursed or compensated when we do these contracts with having a third party agency. With these direct contracts, I mean, you can. The agencies don't want you to know this, but you can technically call a hospital up and be like, hey, do you need me? And you can talk to the CEO and you can make a contract. But I think a big reason that it's hard to do that sometimes is I just frankly don't have the time to call every hospital in the freaking country. But and that's the thing is if you build those connections, that's where you get into a sweet spot, like Dr. Patel. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think as you work more, I started getting word of mouth referrals and meeting other docs that wanted to work together. And so it became a lot easier to do those direct. I have a friend that just cold calls hospitals. He has a group of like 4 hospitals he covers. And so, and you have to remember the agencies have a fee associated. And really, as agencies provide a lot, unfortunately, in an emergency for us, they have a shelf life on how long you stay there because unfortunately, a lot of times the hospitals want permanent staffing. And so I didn't like having to keep re-credentialing over and over again, which does still happen with our job, but a little bit less than what would happen with a full-time agency. But there are definitely benefits to both.
Cool. So to expand on that a little, we got a question from Dimple Wada. I'm not saying it right. I apologize. I'm giving up there. Along with balancing family challenges, how do you balance work-life challenges along with traveling?
I feel
think,
it's like what you were saying with your, schedule, but
yeah. I talked about this on another talk. So because we're a group, we also employ somebody that just sort of, we call him our babysitter. He just sort of manages our lives while we're gone. So things like when you buy a house, which I don't think is the greatest thing to do, but if you decide to do one, buy one, get ready for a whole nother world of hell. But basically things breaking down. The Xfinity guy is going to come from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., so you better be home for that. So we have a guy who will basically help manage like car stuff, house stuff. He helps with like kid stuff, and we sort of employ him through us. And I would imagine I have another colleague who does like 50-50 agency in his own through his own quote unquote corporation, and he uses an assistant just to do as a write-off. So I think offloading things to people that can be offloaded gives you more free time, so that when you are home or around loved ones, you have more free time. As much as I love taking my car to get serviced, if that can get done before I get home, I would appreciate that. So there are definitely tricks, tricks around it. I don't know. What do you think?
That's awesome. I don't know. I hadn't thought that's awesome. If you, I felt that when you talked about the schedule, since I am moving from place to place nonstop, my schedule looks awful. And I'll add a caveat to this. I'm actually, I gotta be careful what I say, but I'm going through some
virtual doctor. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a physician.
That's a whole other secret. But I actually am undergoing virtual interviews right now for going to other sorts of steps in my career, we'll say. But my schedule's pretty rough. So one of the things that like you brought up, I mean, man, I wish I had a secretary. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But like I feel like things like that, and like Kyle was saying that he's described before. I don't know. I think things like that would be cool to have. Like, I mean, if we could afford it, or depending what place you're at. But I think everything you said. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that because I haven't had those challenges in particular pop up for me. So it's kind of just been kind of going along for right now.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I call it life admin. Trying to do life admin while you're also trying to balance being a physician. And that's really any locums or non-locums. So I think anything that I can offload and not have to deal with, it just gives me more time. So I can go watch like a Bollywood movie with my mom and dad, and that makes them happy. I don't know why, but it does. So, things like that.
That's funny.
Cool. Hey, Dimple, thank you for that question. I apologize that I completely got your name wrong, I think. Shamia, actor, if you could give any piece of advice to a student, what would it be? I'm still a student, technically. What do I need to know?
Hey, I was going to do a little pitch here when I got asked to speak for Student Doctor Network, and I'm not getting paid to say this. Man, I was just telling my residents I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Student Doctor Network. I mean, I got the worst pre-med advice. I did not do well on round one of the MCATs. And so I use the site religiously to talk to people. And boy, oh boy, did it help me. I mean, so talk to people. Yeah, talk to doctors. And you're going to see like an SDN logo flash behind me. I'm just kidding. Talk to people. Talk to as many people as possible. Get as much advice as you can. Especially, there's just so many hurdles in medicine for like applications, MCAS, GPA, taking pre-med courses at your school or not, science GPA, doing extra, I mean, just so much. And then getting the interview, how many should you apply to? And so many people have been through it, and there's more than willing. And all the people that helped me on the site. I mean, my God, I can't even, these major decisions, like one minor one was like taking Orgo and stuff at my college versus taking it back in Houston. And my college was all about trying to weed people out and just fail you. And when I took it in Houston, it was hard, but they want you to succeed. They're both the same. And I think that really would have defined if I had gone through in the end. So yeah, just talk to people, and people are doctors, pre-meds, med students, whatever. And I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help you.
So I actually have the totally opposite like thought on this, which is actually really funny. So when I was asked to talk to this, I religiously avoided student doctor network.
Oh, is
But
that
here,
right?
but here's my reason why, right? I think it's a very useful tool, and I think the problem that you can run into, it's like when you talk to anyone now, I love it when I talk to doctors and they're like, oh yeah, you should know this, it's on the boards. People don't
Yeah,
really know what's on the boards unless they're writing for the boards. So I get what I would caveat that and I've looked at Student Doctor Network. There's a lot of good advice, but to take some of it with some sort of grain of salt and not, so there's certain things to pick and choose to know, like what you want to worry about or what you want to take is to the right direction. So I think on that end, the other part that I always try to tell my students, or well, if you're undergrad, is to really think about things outside of medicine. And in my opinion, the people that are going to be that are going to be good physicians are not just thinking like so tunnel visioned in science a lot of times, and they've gone through these other paths. I mean, it sounds like for Dr. Patel, like doing surgery and then going to doing another residency and then going to emergency. You've had different life experience, and now to be non-traditional and take some time off and to invest that. And like Kyle was saying that he's, like you were in the service, like it's really cool to have those other experiences because it gives you a more well-rounded approach to things when you're going through. And that's the one thing that I personally can't stand is when I've had students or residents that are too hyper focused on some nitty gritty detail that really doesn't matter in the big picture of things, because that's how we're trained through our medical training. But I think with the way they've changed med school admissions, I mean, that's important to think about, right? There's things with like ethics on there, sociology. So I guess my biggest thing would be I would put a good amount of time invest a good amount of time in yourself in things outside of medicine. We want to know what you do when you're not doing medicine a lot of times, because that's going to be part of what makes you a good person to work with. So I think those are things that I would do. In addition, you can like talking to people, you're going to get a good picture, and the more you talk, I definitely agree with that. But I also try not to trust too many people, because you never know what kind of quacks you might get. As
yeah.
I say that, of course.
As much good advice as you get, I think there's a lot. I remember when like people were talking about interviews and how many they got, and there's a lot of advice which like can terrify you and can really shatter your confidence. Or people would list their GPA, MCAT, and then say where they got interviews and stuff like that will just, I think, totally bring you down.
Yeah, that's what I didn't like.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. It's like in medical school. I was asking the med student today, when you walk around the library and you see somebody who's highlighted the whole syllabus twice and you just on chapter one, and you're like, oh my God, I'm so behind. I took 3 years off from undergrad to med school, and I couldn't agree with that more. You're making one of the biggest decisions of your life. And look, the medicine you're going to learn, it's science, it's a lot of pattern recognition. Being a doctor is hard in other ways. You're not building the CAT scanner, but it is difficult in different types of ways. But I think being a well-rounded person who knows why they're there, is mature, has a realistic perspective when you go in. Like, I don't need to be number one in my class. You're still going to be a doctor, and you take things better. And I think the maturity will carry you through. Because I'll tell you, that's a whole other discussion. But when you finish your training, and it'll go by fast, then you're just done. And I can't even tell you how many of my colleagues are in this like void of what do I do with my life? Like, there's nothing else to do. I'm done publishing and I'm done with my 50,000 fellowship. And now you just live life. And hopefully you have like your personality, your hobbies, your loved ones. You have a good support network of friends. Because it can be tough. It sounds silly to say, but when you're done, yeah, you're done, and it's just time to start living.
Oh man, and like not to like I'll be honest, like I felt that so much. I finished,
Yeah,
I only finished a couple of years ago. So, and there's pros and cons of thoughts on this. I do not believe that loan forgiveness or all the student loan forgiveness now will extend to doctors. They're pretty clear that no matter how much the president extends, it's probably not going to come to us. I'm going to be loan free very soon.
yeah,
And the reason I did that was I felt the exact thing you said, which is I feel that kind of void. Like you go to school and like if your head is like, oh, you're going through it's, and then it's 10 years, you're done with your 11, 12 years of post high school training, and then you're like, huh, Now what? You know, it's
So
like I 100% agree with that. So I'm trying to refine that for myself right now. And part of that for me was in fellowship, but it's, you know, that's a question of whether I'm just doing that because of that void. But I definitely agree. I think that's the most important thing that I would think about from the beginning if I were to go back, which is there's more than this point right now.
yeah, I don't want to date myself here. I think I already told my age, but I call being a doctor just prolonged adolescence. You are just a prolonged adolescent, right? You've never had a house. You have no idea how to balance your freaking checkbook, and now you're making an adult salary, and you have no clue what to do. And I think doctors either live like, keep up with the Joneses and buy expensive cars and homes, or they drive like a 1972 Camry, which is like, has all these like, repossession, don't drive this car, it'll kill you. Like, so, but
Yeah.
it's tough. It's really tough. And I can't emphasize, I think taking time off later does get a little more difficult, but there's no
Oh
path.
yeah.
I can't emphasize that enough. You don't have to go undergrad, med school, residency, but you can always take time off and do another degree, do something off for a year. By the way, between my switching residencies, I moved to London and I did my MPH. I just always something I wanted to do. And it was like the best time ever, and I completely loved it. And then I started working, and then I'm doing the exact opposite of what I ever thought I'd be doing. And you just have to be open and flexible, and it's really catered to a lot of things that I like doing, like meeting new people and traveling, and having time off to do my own things outside of medicine.
I graduated high school in 2001, so I'm there with you on the being dated part.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go any further on that.
Yeah,
I usually lie about my age, but I'm like, I probably shouldn't lie on a.
And it's never too late to change what you're doing though. And I just think I have this new concept I've thought of in the last couple of years. So by getting this locum job in Maine, starting in January, I went to Maine. Most of the jobs I do, I work nonstop because I was focused on loans. When I got to this job in Maine, the director said, "No, you can't work nonstop. It's too busy. I'm going to give you days off." And when she gave me days off, I was like, "Oh shoot, this is what people have days off. Like, what do you do?" And like, and I discovered this. There's this concept called the Maine the way life should be, and it's a lot more slower pace, relaxed. But the thing I started thinking about was it's possible to have more than one career, more than one profession in a lifetime. And I think that that's one of those things that I've started to think about more. Think about the concept of fire, and these other ways to go. So I think that just gets to the point of staying open minded, which is, I think we're all on the same page with that one.
I think it's important to know, like, with your degree, you can do a lot of stuff outside of just clinical practice. And I think a lot of doctors, you get everything sort of handed to you. You did this, that, residency, fellowship, that thinking outside the box is just a little difficult for people. But I can't emphasize that enough. I think it's going to be well-rounded, things you want to do, and then looking outside of what else would you do? By the way, when COVID happened, I was going through the exercises. What if I don't want to practice anymore? Is this worth it anymore? And it's a good thought process and exercise to go to see what else you might do. You can help people in so many different ways outside of just being a doctor and seeing patients clinically. So again, all things to think about. But I do think going to medical school and getting that foundation can get you to do a lot of great things to help people.
Cool. So gentlemen, we're coming up about on time. There's a couple more. Would you guys be good with 2 more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So this is a fun one. Do you see locums work becoming more popular with newer medical students or more the norm for hospital staffing? Because I heard about locums and like, I'm single, I don't have kids. I looked at buying a house and then I saw the year-over-year prices and went, absolutely not. Like, this sounds awesome to me.
Honestly, I'm going to tell you, I mean, I didn't have any clue what this was until my second year as an attending. I was so silly. I don't know why I didn't look at other options for careers, which is why I hammer home in my residence, to look at other options for how you can work as a physician. I do think as we prioritize more family, more just ourselves, to be happy at our job, I think that work-life balance is something we all strive for. And I think it's kind of a BS work-life. What does that even mean? But I think trying to achieve some level of it where we're happy at our job and we're not killing ourselves working, and really for what? I think it will be more popular. Also, I know in my specialty, I know it's specialty specific, we're opening a lot of residencies in emergency. I don't know what that's going to do to the job market against the attrition rate. And so if the markets get more saturated, then, the jobs are generally going to be in more rural areas. And I really believe you should get paid what you're worth. And if you're not getting paid for what you're worth, I don't think you're going to be happy. And I find when I do locums work, I'm getting the compensation I feel is, at level at what I should be getting paid. So yeah, I think it will be more popular. And I think, as we were just talking about before, as people look at doing other things, you could do real estate, you could be a writer, you could do so many other things and be a doctor as well. My sister is also a pediatrician, and she also is very involved in climate change and pediatrics. So she works with a lot of not-for-profits on the effects of climate change on the pediatric population. And then she also does, I think 4 clinical shifts a month, 24 hours, I think 3 or 4 24-hour shifts a month. So she does a lot of podcasting. So yeah, there's just a lot of flexibility it gives you versus if you're in a pediatric office in a private practice full-time trying to make partner. That's a completely different track. And I don't think you're going to have as much time to explore other avenues for that.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add on to that, the second part there, the norm for hospital staffing. I have thought about this a lot as far as looking at travel nursing. It's ridiculous. So I trained in Memorial Hermann, so I was right down the street from you, and LBJ. So, hospitals down the street from Dr. Patel. So we're in the same city. And what you look at is I have seen nurses that are in the same city. They work at one hospital, but they go take a travel assignment at the hospital next door. And it's crazy because they don't have to go anywhere and they're getting paid way more money, but they're not really traveling. And there's some states and cities that have rules against it and laws that you can't travel within a certain distance. But I guess the question is the norm for hospital staffing. I mean, I don't know. At some point, there's going to be some line because in general, a traveler or a locum is going to cost more. And so I don't know at what end that's going to happen. If let's say that all physicians today, every single one of us became independent contractors or joined contracting groups or became locums, I don't know what that would do with the system or what would happen. And I mean, the ER has been staffed by contractor groups for a while, right? Pediatrics is not as mobilized, but it's getting there. There's pediatric hospitalist contractor groups. There's internal medicine has been hospitalist contractor groups for a while. And so what that means is the hospital doesn't own any of or doesn't employ any of the providers as these groups. I do wonder what will happen as far as that goes. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a question because I think it's how we have to think about our job security or who we work with or for. I mean, that's what I think will change in the future. I mean, I don't know. That's
yeah, and I'd add on to that. Just keep in mind, and this is all just the realistic setting of the healthcare setting. A lot of our ER staffing companies are owned by private equity companies, and for premed people that are not as much into business now, and I didn't know what private equity meant when I was a premed. Basically, it's for profit, and they're running things for profit. And some of the hospitals I work at, they do these absolutely unethical, malicious things, understaff, underpay our nurse practitioners. And it's not good, and it's evil. I just say evil. And so if you're in that model, it's something you need to be aware of. And, having options to not be in that kind of setting. I'll fly to Alaska if I have to, if I can work with a hospital that does not have private equity money involved in it. That's not making me do unsafe models of practice. Because what if that's your mom or your dad? And I'm having to do metrics and door-to-doc times and how long it takes till they're admitted and all this nonsense, which is all human construct made up so they can make basically more money. Some of it's flow, but a lot of it has come back to billing. And I don't want to be in that model. That's not why I became a doctor. And if I have to travel to do that, I'm more than willing to do it to be happier at my job.
Cool. Thank you for that. So last question. Some of these we didn't get to. Apologies for the time constraint on that. But last question here from Dimple. Would you change anything from when you applied to med school to what you're doing now? This is also an excellent question.
Yeah, I would have gone into business or dentistry or something else. But partially kidding, but I don't know. I think I'm happy with where I am. Like it's kind of nice. One thing I think that was interesting is the student loan part. I went to a private one of the more expensive medical schools, and I know some friends that have gone to Caribbean medical schools, and the debt is something that I would I think there's ways to be smarter about it if you're going to take it on, or to consider different ways, like Dr. Patel was saying with taking organic chemistry somewhere versus not. I mean, there's little things like that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. In like 10 years, since I've been out for the last couple of years, nobody has asked me where I went to medical school. Nobody, and things like that that's what I would say would be the big thing. Just focus on the bigger picture.
Yeah, I've been really learning or trying to learn more and more about personal finance, and I don't know why we don't get ever taught anything, but I can't emphasize that enough. It does not matter where you go. I went to a state medical school. I went to UT Southwestern in Dallas. I took time off and I worked to save up money, but coming out with crushing loans, paying 60+ thousand for a medical school versus when you could be at a state school and pay under like 10 or 15,000. There's absolutely no reason. The only reason I could think is maybe if you're a total academic and you want to be in the academic hierarchy and names matter, but really the residency I think makes a doctor, and there's great training everywhere. But please start your journey early and think about the loans and the finance and how you can tackle it. It crushes doctors, because what you end up doing is you come out, you work yourself to death trying to pay off these loans while trying to live a doctor life. You learn nothing about money, and it just leads to burnout and dissatisfaction. I think that's things to keep in mind, the finance part. And people told me, again, my Indian father told me, learn about it, and I just ignored him. And in the end, I started doing it myself, because I'm like, nobody will manage your money better than you. I can't emphasize that enough. And boy, do people love managing your money as a doctor, because they know you don't know jack. And so they'll be thrilled to take a dip in your wallet. So yeah, I can't agree with that more. Just think about where you go. I think majoring in something non-science, you do not need to be a freaking biology major to be a doctor. I did economics. I started in film, and they were both very fun and very interesting. You can take time off and think about your med schools. It's just so ridiculous what colleges are charging and medical schools are charging. And I saw when NYU decided to commit to making tuition free, that's where every school needs to go. You're sacrificing so much to help and heal people. And I think it'll really help you post residency when you're married or you have kids or you're worrying about college planning for them and things like that.
Cool. I have a friend who's a professional commodities trader who said, respect to finances, find out what a doctor's doing and do the opposite.
Yeah, that's, my friend calls them DDDs, dumb doctor decisions. Hey, I've got a great investment deal for you. We'll make it 10x. Yeah, dumb doctor. It is not that hard to learn about finance. These people are not putting in nearly as much of the schooling and training that you put into. So you can do it. And don't make a DDD. Don't do it.
I was gonna say, elephant. Your car seat looks very comfortable over there. So I think though I 100% agree, and that's it. My mom always says the doctors aren't good with business. But I would be honest. I think by us both being here to talk to people about it, we've made some different choices. So I don't know that I wouldn't not do what we did. But I agree. I do agree that, and that goes round back to something else that we talked about earlier. I take what people say with a grain of salt, and if everybody's doing it, then there's something, I don't know, maybe something to think about. That's why we're not doing something that everybody's doing. That's why we've done it.
And remember, the minute the car gets off that lot, it depreciates like half its value. So don't buy a new car.
Yep.
That's it. That's your financial advice for the day.
No, my advice overall too. I think no matter what, I would say this to Dimple and anyone, because I watch co-residents fall apart, and I guarantee Dr. Patel would say this too. I think I don't know, maybe you wouldn't say this, but I would get a contract attorney. Like, that's the thing I tell all my residents, like, get a freaking contract attorney. That is what you need to do if you forget everything else.
Yeah, completely agree. And I was just going to add one more thing. When you finish down the road, I don't use a financial planner, but if you do use one, just look into whoever you use, how they do it, how they're getting paid. Most people say only a fee-only advisor, but yeah, just look into these things. And again, talk to people. People have been down this path before that can help you.
Cool. Yeah, don't invest in crypto.
Don't invest in crypto. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you to everybody for giving us these questions. Dr. Cabrera, Dr. Patel, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed learning about what you guys do. Locum sounds absolutely awesome to me. So it was really, really great to learn about your experiences and find out more about what locums is. Thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
having us.
Yeah, this is really fun. I think I do stuff with Locum Story, and there's a lot of good articles other people write on there too, there's videos and but yeah, I think it's just really something to look into. So thanks, this was really fun.
Yeah.
Cool. So Dr. Patel, Locum Story, where can people find that online?
I think it's locumstory.com, and our group has a website, Mercision, MERCASIONEM.com, has a link to Locum Story. It's just a lot of articles about basically everything we just talked about. Starting, how do you start, what you do about rates, how do you travel, what do you bring when you travel, all this kind of stuff, which you just learn by, again, seeing what other people are doing.
Yeah, and I write for them too, and they have a oh, I just saw your face pop up here. I was gonna say there's an Instagram. Yeah, there's an Instagram, and I just noticed. Yeah, there's you're on here for one of their little things too. Probably for the week where we said Happy Locums Week or whatever that
Happy
was.
Locums Week. Yeah. Ironically,
yeah.
I don't do social media, so this is how I
Yeah.
learned about it.
No, I
My
refuse
mom
to
has
do
a
other
Facebook
social
account,
media.
so yeah,
That's
I learned
funny.
from my mom. But if your mom's doing Facebook, it's not cool anymore, people. So just get off.
Yeah, Facebook was never cool.
No, when your mom's on it and she's messaging you with emojis, it's not cool anymore. I mean, sorry, Mom. I love you.
That's rough. Dr. Cabrera, can you plug your website one more time, please?
Yeah, so thenomadicpediatrician.com.
All right, awesome. Hey, thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, Dr. Cabrera, Dr. Patel, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks a lot.